Jason's here to talk about the role of sleep, and he always worries that he gets the slot immediately after lunch. So whether there's a connection with that, I don't know, but we moved you one up from lunch. So I'm going to introduce our two speakers, and then we'll hear them one after the other, and if there are any questions afterwards, then we'll do that. And just to warn you, what I might then do is merge the coffee, the afternoon tea, with the round table discussions afterwards, so that you're ready. So Jason, Professor Jason Ellis is the Director of the Northumbria Centre for Sleep Research at Northumbria University. Jason's currently funded by Action for ME to undertake a research study exploring the role of sleep in ME and CFS. In his presentation, he's going to give us an overview of the role of sleep in ME, both in terms of theory and in respect of his research findings. And alongside him is Professor Annalena Venieri, who's a Professor of Clinical Neuropsychology at the University of Sheffield. Along with ME-CFS, her research interests are in early and differential diagnosis of dementia and the evaluation of various treatments of Alzheimer's. She also leads the university's translational neuropsychology group, which focuses on the neuroscientific, clinical and behavioural aspects of neurodegenerative and neurological disorders, including Parkinson's disease, ME and CFS. You're both very welcome. And Jason, if you'd like to take the stage first. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh my. Nothing to do with me. It's a shame that Julia's left, actually, because I did want to thank her for turning me on to working with patients with ME. So I'm going to talk about the role of sleep in ME. Now, what do we know? Well, we know that sleep problems are significant issues for patients with ME. About 87 to 95% of people with ME will also report a significant sleep problem. Now, let's put that into context. People with breast or prostate cancer, we're seeing rates of about 50 to 53% of sleep problems. People with diabetes, we're seeing 80%. So this is a population which is suffering from severe numbers of sleep problems. Now, unfortunately, and we've talked about this today, researchers tend to sit in silos, or they have previously. And so, although there's been quite a lot of research in terms of sleep and ME, in fact, there have been 32 studies which have looked at the objective sleep of people with ME. But what we found is actually not a lot. We found no consistent patterns that exist in terms of this population. So I'll just introduce you to a few terms. So we've got TST, so that stands for total sleep time. Sleep efficiency, so how efficient are you at sleeping? How much time do you spend in bed against how much time do you spend in bed asleep? We've got sleep latency. How long does it take you to get off? WASO, wake after sleep onset. How long are you awake in the night? And then you've got percentage of stage 1 sleep, stage 2 sleep, slow wave sleep, and REM sleep. So they make up all of the components, and we'll talk a bit more about those in a minute. We also look at number of awakenings. So how many awakenings do you think a normal, healthy adult will have every hour? Yes, this is the interactive part of the day. I don't know. Well, thanks for that. Well, what we actually see is we wake up on average about 10 times every hour. Now, these are known as arousals, but I'm not allowed to use that word, apparently. Now, what we see is that these are the awakenings that we have where we don't normally remember them. We just mumble, turn over, or shift, and then go back to sleep. So we look at the number of awakenings that are reported. We see how many per hour there are, and, of course, how long it takes someone to reach the first REM cycle. So how long does it take you to reach the first period of rapid eye movement? Now, why on earth would that be a very clinically relevant variable? Well, we know that how long it takes you to get into REM can determine your cognitive functioning. So let's have a look at these numbers. Well, what I've highlighted in red are all of the ranges outside what we consider normal. So this is an amalgamation of the 32 objective sleep studies that have been done to date. And what you can see is of those that are red, there is abnormality in each grouping. So what we're seeing from these previous studies is that there are significant sleep issues, but there is no consistent pattern here. Now, what that leads us to think, and this really feeds into what Stephen was talking about this morning, is that there might not be just one sleep problem in this population. So, the thing that we like to do, well, at least I like to do, is I will always go back and ask the real people. It's wonderful to sit in my office and theorize, which I do with my white cat, but it's very rare that I'm going to come up with the answers on my own. So what we do is we go back to the population, we actually ask them, what is going on? And Zoe Gotts, who's here today, has been conducting the studies for us, and Zoe's been conducting lots of qualitative interviews. The reason that we wanted to go back to people, real people, is there is no in-depth studies. They're very few and far between. The opinions of people with Emmie haven't really been sought. So Zoe's conducted 11 qualitative interviews with patients with a specific focus on their sleep experience. So we want to see what the experience is like, what the subjective report is like. Now, what we can see from this is that three main themes have come out. The first is that there is a sleep pattern variability. This changes over the course, or at least people report that their sleep changes over the course from diagnosis, pre-diagnosis, right the way through to its chronic phase. It also appears to be unpredictable. People don't know how they're going to sleep. They worry about what's going to happen when they do get into bed because they don't know whether they're going to have problems getting off to sleep, staying asleep, waking up several times, or indeed maybe just falling asleep but feeling horribly unrefreshed on waking. The second area is the effect on daytime functioning. Now, we all know, as a sleep scientist, I know, and I'm sure all of you know, bad sleep equals bad day. We generally become more moody, more irritable, we're more likely to fight with our partners. Nice pause there. And so people are trying to manage sleep. On top of everything else in this population, they're trying to manage an inconsistent, unpredictable sleep pattern as well. And then finally, there's the attempts at coping and the illness management. And there seems to be a lot of anxiety and frustration around coping, illness management, which feeds directly into the sleep problems that people are experiencing. The sleep problems aren't a direct result of CFS ME in this particular population group. They appear to be coming multifaceted from a variety of pathways. And I'll talk about that at the end when I show you my fabulous new theory. Yes, it's all about me. Or Zoe. It's all about Zoe. If it goes wrong, it's all about Zoe. If it all goes good, it's all about me. All right. So we figured out what the issues are for our patients in terms of what they're reporting, what they're telling us. Now we want to look at the objective sleep. To look at objective sleep, we use something called a polysomnogram. And this is a lovely illustration. Do you like my drawing? I'm a drawer, I am. So, it is the most important technique that we use when we're dealing with objective sleep. It allows us to measure several characteristics, physiological characteristics, simultaneously. So we apply lots of electrodes to individuals. So these generally focus around the head, where we do EEG, electroencephalography, EOG, electrooculography, or chin EMGs. So we're looking for muscle tension, eye tension, and brainwave activity, because that's the only way you can tell what stage of sleep somebody is actually in. 2, we look at the abdominal. We want to see through ECG whether the heart is functioning properly, But we also want to look at breathing. Is the individual breathing correctly? Are they breathing naturally? What we do know is that you lose about 2/3 of your lung capacity when you go to sleep. So, of course, in some populations, that's going to have a really big impact. Third, we like the hands. So we use a pulse oximeter in order to look at blood oxygen saturation levels. And then finally, we don't leave out the legs. We do like a nice leg, and so we put EMGs on the legs so that we can measure to see if there is any abnormal jerking or motion in the legs at night. It's really important to reassure the patient and, of course, explain what each of these things does. The other thing to note is that in most clinical practice, we will do at least 2 nights. The reason being, of course, is when you go to bed at night normally, in your homes this evening, do you wire yourself up before getting into bed? Not really. And so it's quite an unnatural situation. So we need at least 1 night of adaptation. So looking at the PSG, we were very fortunate. Julia and I were given 343 polysomnograms from a fatigue service in Holland. So they just gave them to us. And they said, right, have a look at it. This provided us the first ever opportunity, because it is such a big sample, in order to do a cluster analysis. And Stephen talked about this earlier. It's a statistical way to find out if there are certain subgroups or phenotypes within a particular population. So we did look at the 343. The first thing that we did notice was about 101 really had suspected sleep apnea. So they had an apnea-hypopnea index of over 15. So we excluded them out of the equation. We also noticed that there were 17 patients who had suspected periodic limb movement disorder. In other words, the EMGs were showing pulses in the legs at night. So we took those out. That's about 1/3 of our population has been taken out, and it's left us with 239 people who were not explained by abnormalities in the apnea-hypopnea index or in the periodic limb movement index. So what we've done with that is we then looked at the cluster analysis. Our cluster analysis gave us 4 very specific phenotypes. The first phenotype really was problems getting off to sleep. Our patients in this report were talking about having very few awakenings, normal quality sleep, but it was really tough to get off to sleep. The second population, no difficulties getting off to sleep at all, very few awakenings, but there was a feeling of restlessness throughout the night. And this was evidenced by an awful lot of arousals every hour and high levels of what we call stage 2 sleep. Now, when we talk about the stages of sleep, stage 1 sleep, we don't know what that's for. We've done loads and loads of science and we still don't know what it's for. What we do know is that babies don't have it. Stage 2, we generally assume, is about sensory gating. It's when your body is trying to help you get to sleep, and the way that it does that is if there's an external signal, such as a noise, or if there's an internal sensation, such as pain, the brain produces something called a K complex. This is a small spike in the EEG, and what that does is it prevents the individual from taking on board that external sensation or the internal sensation. So it's almost like saying, look at me, don't focus on that, look at me. So I'm very akin to it. Now, what we do see is this population have significant amounts of stage 2 sleep. It seems like they have to do a lot more sensory gating than what we would see in a typical population. The third group, no difficulties getting off to sleep, few awakenings, but there is this real feeling of being unrefreshed in the morning. And they've had a vast amount of sleep time. That's the key point here. This population are spending a lot of time asleep, and then they're waking up feeling unrefreshed. The final group, short sleep durations, No difficulties getting off to sleep again, but of course lots of awakenings during the night. So these people are waking up as one of their normal awakenings every 20 minutes or so, but this is turning into a long awakening. Now, as a clinician, in terms of sleep, I would generally put these into 4 categories. You've got your group 1 phenotype, which we would call a sleep onset insomnia. We'll talk about group 4 as well. That's a sleep maintenance insomnia. And then we've got our 2 groups in the middle, which make up the majority of this population. It's about 85%, just shy. And this is groups 2 and 3. Normal sleep, but unrefreshing. And it could be about the sensory gating. And group 3, hypersomnia. Lots and lots of sleep, but still unrefreshing. Now, what's very interesting about this is we're seeing one very specific categorization in both of these groups. They're both demonstrating very short REM latencies. Now, I'm not going to get into the controversy because periodically what we have seen is that REM latency, a low REM latency, if it is accompanied with small amounts of slow wave or deep refreshing sleep, is usually the onset of depression. However, let's take this away. We're not seeing the short, deep sleep. So what we're proposing here is that there is something wrong in terms of sensory gating. The individual is not being able to get into the deeper sleep because it's become unstable. And so we need to figure out what that instability is about. Now, of course, there are a couple of things that are wrong with this particular study. The first thing, it was given to us, so we don't know too much about the people. What we do know is that this is a one-night study, so this might be representative of the stress and anxiety of having to go to Holland. It was a try. But more importantly, we don't know how much napping has gone on in this population. There may be napping or other daytime factors which are essentially masking some of these effects. So this is where Action for Emmie has come in for the second time. The first time was with the qualitative interviews. What they're doing now is they're helping us do a 3-night protocol. So we're not doing just one night, not just 2 nights. Action for Emmie are giving us 3 nights. It's fantastic. This will be one of the only studies that's ever been conducted on a 3-night protocol. And that's terribly important because the first night is rubbish, he says after just telling you all about it. The second night is an adaptation. The third night is going to be where we get the real characteristics of this population. So here's where we are at the moment. We've had to exclude some people. Some have declined to participate. I have to say, the Emmie population has been most fantastic. I have worked with all populations. I can't believe it. They are the most amazing population to work with. Anyway, we've enrolled, we've completed the first overnights. We've had to get rid of some of our people. Some of them have got suspected sleep apnea. Some of them have got suspected periodic limb movement disorder. Nobody's got undiagnosed narcolepsy, thankfully. So that's where we are at the moment, and I'll tell you some of the preliminary findings. The objective sleep in the majority of those people with ME in our population is abnormal. When we compare it to the control groups, about 92% have got a sleep abnormality. Again, there is no consistent pattern. We are mapping it on to the 4 phenotypes that we've identified previously. We have had to exclude several individuals for undiagnosed cases of obstructive sleep apnea. And that is a bit of a problem. There seems to be an issue here that needs addressing. We have had to reschedule a few times, hence why we're running a wee bit late. But at the end of the day, people want to do the study, and so we're more than happy to reschedule. Now, we've also been taking cortisol levels from this population. We know that it's stable in this population over successive days, but it is elevated suggesting an autonomic dysfunction. Of course, once we've got the final studies, we're going to take Zoe out for dinner, and because she's worked so hard, and then we're going to make her work for the rest of her life. So here's a theoretical model that we've put together really based upon our findings so far. What we see here is the onset of ME really directly feeds into fatigue. The individual will feel fatigued. However, there are other factors that are feeding into the fatigue in this population. There is a huge struggle to get a diagnosis and get adequate support. This builds frustration and anger, which of course equate to fatigue. It's tiring to go backwards and forwards with healthcare providers. So the fatigue isn't all about the disease profile itself. There are also socio-economic and socio-emotional factors that are feeding into the fatigue. Irrespective of where the fatigue is coming from, what it does result in is irregularity to normal sleep patterns. We can see this in terms of decreased sleep efficiencies, reduced slow-wave sleep, but most importantly, it appears in this population that both the homeostat, the drive to sleep, appears to be broken. Also, the circadian rhythm, the body clock, appears to be broken. And each of our individuals are showing at least evidence of one of those four categorizations. Each of those four categorizations we know feed directly into sleep disorder. And what do we know about a sleep disorder? We know an awful lot about sleep disorders compared to 50 years ago, and now we know that it results in altered immunocompetence, autonomic dysregulation, and HPA axis dysfunction, which all again feed into the fatigue. As such, what we're seeing here is we've created a vicious cycle of fatigue, not only through the ME from its onset, but also from the continuation of what's going on in the lives of our people. Now, as always, I like to thank everyone, because I do nothing for a living except for float around the world looking lovely. Specifically, the people highlighted Professor Julia Newton, who is, as I said, fabulous. And I did find something, Googled her. She wasn't the first choice. Dr. Vincent Deary, and of course Zoe for doing all of this amazing work and, being the next generation of ME CFS researchers. Thank you.